The scent of betrayal, a duel in the heart of Madrid, the night in the private room of El Cenáculo, one of Madrid's most exclusive and discreet restaurants, smelled of more than history and fortune. It smelled of a vintage Ribera del Duero worth a fortune, of secrets whispered among aristocratic families, and above all, of a power so thick you could almost cut it with a silver knife. At the head of the table sat Julian Thorne, a man carved from marble, the billionaire golden boy of finance. Beside him was his wife, Isabella Sterling, the woman whose surname was Marble Mistress. And facing them, radiant with ambition and champagne, was Ava Sinclair, Julian's protégé. But that night, the heavy atmosphere was imbued with something else, something no one anticipated. The spark of a war. A word, barely a contemptuous murmur. Street trash. That would be enough to light the fuse. And no, this wasn't a war for a man's heart. It was a pitched battle for the soul of an empire. Are you ready to witness the crumbling facade of Madrid's elite? Chapter 1. The Tower and the Obsidian Throne, the boardroom on the 88th floor of the global Sterling Tower, the most imposing skyscraper on the Paseo de la Castellana. It was designed to inspire respect, otherwise terror. It was a cavern of glass and chrome, dominated by a single 15-meter-long slab of polished obsidian that served as a table. From there, the view was a divine panorama of Madrid, a constant reminder to the 12 people seated that they were not in the world, but above it. At the head of that table, a modern throne, sat Isabella Sterling, president and CEO of Global Sterling. She wasn't beautiful in the fleeting, superficial sense of current fashion. She was an imposing woman, with a timeless beauty, a presence that lingered in the memory. Her dark hair, pulled back in a severe bun, framed a face sculpted with unwavering determination. She wore an impeccable bespoke suit of Loropiana, the color of an impending storm over the Sierra de Guadarrama mountains. Her only piece of jewelry was a heavy platinum ring bearing the hallmark of her great-grandfather, the founder of the bank that had evolved into this global colossus of private capital. She was listening. Her stillness was her most powerful weapon. While the other members of the board, old fortunes with centuries of history and unscrupulous new sharks, debated the details of a 40 billion euro acquisition in the sustainable energy sector. Isabella simply observed. She absorbed the information. The man tapping his pen was nervous. The woman who was constantly checking her phone was bored. And the man who was arguing the loudest, Mr. Torres, was the weakest link. "The projections are soft, Isabella," Torres snapped, his face flushed. "We are committing capital that could be better used in the Thorne Capital Fund. Julian's returns, Isabella's voice cut through the air, not loudly, but with a clarity that instantly silenced the room. "They are excellent. They are also, Mr. Torres, entirely dependent on the infrastructure and capital that we provide. Thorne Capital is not a separate entity. It's a division. My division. Let's not forget that." The air crackled. Julian Thorne was her husband. He was also her most brilliant and troublesome employee. He was the CEO of Thorne Capital, the venture capital and hedge fund arm of Sterling Global. He was the charismatic face, the business genius, the man who graced the covers of Forbes and Expansión. To the public, he was the billionaire. The board, however, knew the truth. Julian Thorne owned precisely 10 of his division, a stake granted to him upon his marriage 15 years earlier, locked in a trust so complex that only Sterling's legendary legal team, located 3 floors below, could decipher it. The other 90% and the voting rights on 100 belonged to Sterling Global's majority shareholder, Isabella. She continued, sustainable energy procurement is not about soft projections. It's about the next 50 years. Sterling Global didn't survive 2 world wars and 3 recessions by chasing the shiniest, fastest-growing object. It survived by owning the foundation. We will proceed. He glanced at his senior legal advisor. The vote is approved, 8-4. Thank you, gentlemen and miss. It was a dismissal. The room emptied with the scraping of 1,000-euro shoes across the polished marble floor. Her father, Arthur Sterling, the retired patriarch, remained, watching her from the edge of the obsidian slab. You're harsh on Torres, she remarked, her voice a dry murmur. Torres is a fool. He's dazzled by Julian. Everyone is. Isabella stood up and went to the window. The city lights were just beginning to twinkle in the twilight. And you're not? Isabella's reflection looked at her, pale and composed. I'm his wife. I'm their boss. The 2 things are, and always have been, separate. You're celebrating the Viridian Systems deal tonight, at the Cenacle, Arthur said. Not as a question, I know. He's very proud of it. Isabella's tone was flat. The Accumula deal, the Viridian Systems acquisition, was a 2 billion euro deal that Julian had personally structured. It was brilliant. However, Isabella's private forensic accounting team had detected that it was slightly problematic. There were irregularities, shell companies used as intermediaries, a final purchase price that seemed inflated by about 80 million, and a new consultant on the payroll. A consultant named Ava Sinclair brought her along, Arthur said. Isabella turned away. His father knew. Of course he knew. He was Arthur Sterling. Her information network was legendary. She thinks she's advising her, Isabella said, the word advising carrying a hint of ash. She's smart, a Wharton graduate. Apparently, she was instrumental in Viridian's deal. She's 28, Bella, and she's not smart. She's a knife. He's playing with a very sharp object, and he's doing it in our house. He doesn't see it as our house, Dad. He sees it as his own. He's forgotten the basics. Then you must remind him. Arthur stood up, approached, and kissed her forehead. The name Sterling isn't a trophy, Isabella. It's a responsibility and a weapon. Don't let him or his ward tarnish it. Enjoy your dinner. Isabella remained at the window long after he left. She thought about her marriage. It had been a partnership, a fusion of his family's legacy and his raw, boundless ambition. She had loved his energy, his fire. He had loved her power, her stability. It had worked, until it didn't. Over the past year, the Thorn Capital Division had become a black box. Julian had grown distant, his phone always face down, his nights filled with urgent meetings. And then there was Ava Sinclair. Isabella had seen her, a flash of red hair, a quick, dismissive laugh at a company event. She was the kind of woman who mistook ambition for intelligence and audacity for power. Isabella checked her watch. 7:30 in the evening. The reservation was for 8:30. He pressed his assistant's intercom. Have Price bring the car. And Alice, call Sullivan and Cromwell. Tell them I want the Thorn agreement file on my desktop. The unedited version. Yes, the one with Section 7. A cold, methodical calm settled over her. Tonight wasn't just a celebration. It was a settling of scores. Julian had been constructing his own narrative, one where he was the king, and she was the quiet, supportive queen. Tonight, he would be reminded who really owned the castle. Chapter 2. The Trader's Banquet. The Cenacle wasn't a restaurant. It was a sanctuary, hidden away in a restored 19th century bank vault in the heart of the Salamanca district. It had no sign, no website. And rumor had it that the waiting list was 3 years long. The only way in was through a personal recommendation from one of its exclusive, high-net-worth clients. Naturally, the Sterling family had a permanent reservation. When Isabella arrived, the maitre d', a man named Antonio, who looked like a diplomat, greeted her not with a flattering bow, but with a look of silent, profound respect. "Mrs. Sterling, it's a pleasure. Your group is in the Rothschild room. Thank you, Antonio." "My husband? Mr. Thorne arrived some time ago," Antonio said, his eyes blinking for a fraction of a second. "A blink of warning? He's playing games," Isabella agreed with a small, strained smile. "I'm sure he is." Price, her head of security, a tall, silent man who looked as if he were carved from a mountain, escorted her to the heavy, gilded bronze doors of the private room. She stepped aside, and Isabella entered. The South at La Sala Rothschild was intimate, designed for 10 people. A crystal chandelier cast light over a table set with solid silver cutlery and delicate hand-painted china. At the table sat the key players in the Viridian deal, 2 Goldman Sachs bankers, Viridian's former CEO, and Julian. And next to Julian, in the seat that should have been Isabella's, was Eva Sinclair. She wore a red dress, a shade so bright and aggressive it was practically a declaration of war. It was a low-cut dress, and she leaned into Julian's space, her hand resting familiarly on his forearm, laughing at something he'd said. The room fell silent as Isabella entered. Julian jumped to his feet, his face a mask of practiced charm, but his eyes wide with a flash of pure, unaltered panic. "Isabella, darling, you're here." He rushed to kiss her on the cheek. She felt like a cold stone. Julian, his voice even, turned his gaze to the table. "Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to see you again. Robert, congratulations on the sale." I trust the terms were satisfactory. Robert, the former CEO, a man in his 60s, stood up quickly. "Mrs. Sterling, entirely." Her husband is a force of nature. Isabella's smile didn't reach her eyes. "He is, indeed." His gaze finally fell on Eva Sinclair. The younger woman hadn't stood up. She remained seated, sipping her champagne, her expression a careful blend of arrogance and amusement. He was sizing up Isabella, and a quick, dismissive sneer appeared on his lips. "You must be Miss Sinclair," Isabella said, walking slowly toward the table. "Julian has told me a lot about you." "Oh, really?" Ava's voice was a practiced purr. "Then you've put me at a disadvantage, Mrs. Sterling. He's hardly mentioned you." A collective, sharp inhalation. The bankers looked at their plates. The former CEO was suddenly fascinated by the wine list. Julian, his face turning a dangerous shade of red, forced a laugh. "Ava, that's my protégé, always so resourceful." She turned to Isabella. "Honey, Ava was just telling us about the final leverage point she found to close the Viridian deal. It was brilliant." "Oh, really?" Isabella said, without taking her eyes off Ava. "Tell us, Miss Sinclair, what was this brilliant leverage point?" Ava leaned back, swirling her champagne. "Oh, it was just a small thing. Some outdated environmental regulations that the previous board had forgotten to file. We found them and realized we could expedite their removal. For a price. The old guard simply couldn't see the angles, too busy protecting their legacy." The last word was a direct blow, aimed at Isabella. The implication was clear. "You're the old guard. I'm the new one." Isabella stood there for a long moment. Price, standing just outside the door, tensed up. She'd seen that look on her boss's face before. It was the look before the avalanche. "One seat, Antonio," Isabella said coldly, without taking her eyes off Ava. The maitre d' and 2 waiters materialized instantly, placing Isabella at the head of the table, directly opposite Julian. Ava was now to Isabella's right. Trapped, The dinner continued. The tension was so thick you could cut it with silver fish knives. Julian, visibly sweating, tried to steer the conversation back to the agreement, to the markets, to sports, to anything safe. But Ava Sinclair was on a victory lap. She was drunk with power, drunk with her proximity to Julian. She suspected Isabella, drunk on more than just the Romani Conti, on the €5,000 bottle she was pouring herself. She kept interrupting, correcting Julian's version of the agreement with, "Well, actually, Julian, what I found was..." She dismissed the banker's compliments. He treated the former CEO like a relic, and most damningly, he completely ignored Isabella. Until the toast. Julian stood, raising his glass, to the Viridian deal, the most profitable acquisition in Thorn Capital's history, and to the new star who made it possible. To Ava, Eva stood, her dazzling red dress. She raised her glass, not to the table, but to Julian. For Julian, for seeing me, for knowing that to build a real future one must be willing to tear down the old, dusty relics. Without offending history, he smiled directly at Isabella. Isabella, who hadn't touched her food, calmly took a sip of water. The Goldman Sachs man, trying to defuse the bomb, raised his own glass. To Mrs. Sterling, of course, without whose foundation none of this would be possible. It was the wrong thing to say. Ava Sinclair burst out laughing, a high-pitched, ugly sound. He turned to the banker. "Foundation? Is that what you call it? That's just a nice word for a cage." Julian is a titan, and he has been forced to extinguish his light. "Ava!" Julian warned, his voice low and dangerous. The game was over. He knew it. But Ava was too far away. She was performing for an audience of one. Julian wanted to prove she was his equal, his true partner. He directed his venom straight at the silent, observant woman at the head of the table. "Look at her!" Ava mocked, her voice echoing in the now silent room. Sitting there in her... What's that gray thing? Is it wool? In the upper room. She laughed again, a sound that grated on her nerves. Julian needs a partner, someone who can stand in the sun with him. No, not a relic, not an old, dusty piece of... He looked Isabella up and down, his eyes filled with a disgust that was shocking in its purity. Then came the words that would end it all. Ava leaned toward the former CEO, but her voice was meant for the entire room to hear. "You can't slap a high-fashion label on street trash and call it a lady. It's still just trash." The silence that followed was not just the absence of sound. It was a void. It was the cold, inert emptiness of space. Every molecule in the room, every vibration, every glimmer of heat was sucked into the black hole of that awful, career-ending word. The Goldman bankers looked as if they had witnessed a murder. Julian Thorne's face was as white as the tablecloth. He looked, for the first time in his life, completely and utterly terrified. Ava Sinclair, however, kept smiling. She looked triumphant. Finally, she had said aloud what she had been thinking silently. She had slain the dragon. Isabella Sterling didn't move, didn't blush, didn't cry, didn't look at Ava. Simply, very delicately, she placed her linen napkin on the table. She turned her head. Their eyes met. Not with her husband, but with her head of security, Price, who was already moving. Then she turned her eyes to Julian. Her voice wasn't a shout. It was a whisper, and it was the most terrifying sound he had ever heard. Julian. One word. Out. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Chapter 3. The Winter of the Fallen Patriarch. Julian Thorne staggered out of the Rothschild room like a man walking to his own execution. Her legs were numb. The blood roared in her ears so loudly she could barely hear Ava's weak, triumphant laughter, who clearly thought she had won. The fool, she thought. The stupid girl. The foolish suicide victim. Isabella wasn't in the main restaurant. She walked down the marble corridor, her heels clicking with the rhythmic, eerie precision of a funeral toll. She didn't stop until she reached a small, private antechamber, a room used for smoking cigars a century ago, now preserved as a museum piece. Price stood guard at the door, his face an impassive mask. He closed it behind Julian, leaving them alone. The room was dark, paneled in rich mahogany. Isabella didn't turn on the main light. She stood by the window. There remained a small, dark inner courtyard. It was a silhouette against the city's faint glow. "Isabella, darling, I had no idea. Julian stammered. His hands were trembling. He ran them through his perfect, expensive hair. She's crazy. Drunk. I'll fire her. I'll fire her tonight. It's over. I'll call security and have her removed." Isabella turned around, and in the dim light, Julian could see her face. He wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She was blank. It was the face she wore when liquidating a failing asset. "You'll do nothing," his voice said, flat and empty. "Your authority to hire or fire anyone within Sterling Global or any of its subsidiaries was revoked 25 minutes ago." Julian's blood ran cold. She tried to laugh. It came out as a choked cough. "What? Bella, this isn't... You can't be serious. Over a comment, an insult from a drunk employee. That's not proportionate." "The insult," Isabella said, taking a step toward him, was merely confirmation. "I'm not upset, Julian. I'm disappointed. I thought you were smarter. I thought that despite your indiscretions, at least you weren't a fool." "Indiscretions? What?" "No," she snapped, and for the first time, a glint of steel appeared in her voice. "Don't insult my intelligence by denying it. Ava Sinclair, your lover. For 8 months now, from the Aspen retreat." Julian's mouth went dry. How, you, the brilliant negotiator, the force of nature? You paid for his apartment in Tribeca using a shell company, Viridian Assets LLC, which was funded with an €80 million overpayment in the Viridian Royal deal. You diverted €80 million of my family's money, Julian. Money from our shareholders. Not to build a new life, not to escape, but to build a love nest for a 28-year-old girl you foolishly thought was your equal. She knew it. He knew everything. The Viridian agreement. The overpayment. It wasn't a mistake. It was the mistake. "Have you been investigating me?" he whispered, horrified. "I'm the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, Julian. You're the head of my most volatile division, and you've been acting erratically for months. I didn't investigate you. I did my job. I performed a simple audit." He held up his phone. "My forensic team detected the shell company 3 months ago. They knew about Ms. Sinclair, her apartment, the bank transfers, the consulting fees you paid her. They knew everything." "Then why? Why tonight?" Julian pleaded, his mind racing. "I could have fixed this. I could have negotiated." "Why not? Why didn't you confront me privately? Why did you make it public?" Isabella said, her voice returning to that terrifyingly flat calm. "I was prepared to let this play out, to let you wear yourself out." I was going to call you into the office on Monday. We were going to restructure the Thorn Capital Division, absorb your losses, and I was going to send you to our London office to manage our European assets, a polite and quiet exile. Quiet. He was dignified. She looked at him with a profound pity that tore at her soul. But then, you brought her here, to this room. You let her sit in my chair, and you let her call me street trash in front of my father's business associates. She took a small, black-bound book from her bag. It was small, leather, and harmless. Julian recognized it. It was a copy of his original marriage and employment agreement, the one he had signed 15 years ago, laughing, thinking he was the luckiest man in the world. You see, Julian, Isabella said, opening it to a marked page. You and I have two contracts. We have a marriage, which is a personal matter, and we have an agreement, which is a business matter. And you, in your brilliance, insisted that they be linked. He began to read. His voice was clear and precise, like that of a lawyer reading a verdict. Section 7, Clause 4T, the Morality and Public Image Clause. The employee, Julian Thorn, undertakes to conduct himself, both in his professional and personal life, in a manner consistent with the sterling name and the reputation of Sterling Global. Any act of public defamation, moral depravity, or any action that causes public embarrassment or tarnishes the Sterling Global brand will be considered a serious breach of this contract. Julian stared at her. Taking the brand, that's subjective, isn't it? He continued. Upon confirmation of this serious breach, all non-vested shares, options, and performance-based bonuses will be forfeited immediately. All access to company funds, property, and transportation will be revoked immediately. He paused, taking a deep breath. Each and every stipulation within the prenuptial agreement regarding spousal support shall be declared null and void. Julian's world didn't just crumble. It had never existed. The billionaire status, the Forbes covers, the Thorn Capital Fund. It was all his, all built on the foundation of his confidence, his name, and his capital. And he had just, on a spectacularly stupid and arrogant night, set it all on fire. Vela, no, he whispered, his body cold. Please, think of the press, the scandal. It will damage the brand, the scandal. Isabella looked at him, really looked at him, and he saw for the first time, not his wife, but the CEO. The scandal, Julian, is that I allowed a man guilty of wire fraud to run a $40 billion fund for 8 months. The Viridian Systems deal, that €80 million overpayment, isn't an indiscretion. It's a federal crime. You and Miss Sinclair have been defrauding our shareholders. Julian's legs gave way. He collapsed against the wall. No, it wasn't. It was a hold, a creative assignment. It was theft, Isabella declared. And I have the bank transfer records, the server logs, and the text messages between you and Ava planning it. My audit was very thorough. You'd send me to prison. I'm considering it, Isabella said. But for now, I'm simply canceling your contract. This one, he slammed the black book, the one you breached. She walked to the door and opened it. Price was standing there. Julian, she said, without looking back. You're fired. Isabella, wait, he shouted, lunging forward. Price, Isabella said, without looking back. The large security guard stepped between Julian and him, blocking his path. Mr. Thorn, your car will not be waiting for you. Your access to the building has been revoked, and your corporate accounts are frozen. I must escort him off the premises. You can't do this, roared Julian, his terror finally turning to rage. This is my company. My name is on it." "No, Julian." Isabella's voice came from the hallway as she walked in calmly. "I'm taking you back to the Rothschild room. Your name was on the letterhead, but it's just been removed." Julian watched Isabella walk away, her back straight, her step unhurried. The sound of her heels faded off the marble floor, and he was left alone in the mahogany-paneled room with Price. The security guard was an impassive wall of muscle. "You can't be serious," Julian said, trying to recapture a shred of his former commanding presence. "Price, I hired you or approved your quote. Mrs. Sterling signs my checks, sir," Price said, his voice a low murmur. "Please, come with me." "No!" Julian shouted, pushing him away. "I need to talk to her. I need to fix this." He burst out again in the hallway. He could see the entrance to the Rothschild room. He could hear voices. He headed towards it. Ready for what? To beg? To scream? He didn't know. All he knew was that his entire life was evaporating. When he reached the door, Antonio, the maitre de bois, stood in his way. Antonio was a small, delicate man, but he stood firm with the authority of a general. "Mr. Thorne, I'm afraid I can't allow you back into the private room." "Get out of my way, Antonio. That's my dinner." "No, sir," said Antonio, his voice firm but polite. "It's Mrs. Sterling's dinner party. She has requested privacy, and she has settled the bill." Price's hand rested on Julian's shoulder. It was a gentle touch, but it had the unyielding weight of granite. "Sir, the back entrance, please. Let's not make this difficult." "Difficult?" Julian turned, his eyes wide. "My wife she just..." He couldn't even say it. He was half dragged, half escorted through a maze of stainless steel kitchens, past chefs and busboys who deliberately ignored the spectacle of a man in a $20,000 Brioni suit being herded out the service exit. Price pushed him through a set of double doors, and Julian stumbled into a grimy alley, the air thick with the smell of cooking grease and garbage. It was a brutal, jarring contrast to the perfumed air of the inner circle. My car," Julian gasped, straightening his suit. "The Bentley. It's right in front." "No, sir. The Bentley is company property. It was taken out by the fleet manager 30 minutes ago," Price said, glancing at his watch. "Its driver, Miguel, is also a company employee. He's taking Mrs. Sterling home." A cold, hard rain began to fall. Julian looked at Price in disbelief. You're going to leave me here, in an alley?" "My instructions are to see him off the premises, sir. He's off the premises now." Price looked at him, not maliciously, but not sympathetically either. "I'd recommend you call a friend." Price went back inside, and the metal door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the narrow alley. Julian Thorne, the billionaire child prodigy, the titan of Tribeca, stood alone in the rain, in a trash-strewn alley. He fumbled for his phone. He'd call an Uber. No, he'd call a black car. He'd go to the apartment, the one he shared with Isabella, his apartment, the enormous penthouse in Retiro Park. She still had her keys. She couldn't leave him out of her own house, could she? She took out her phone. The screen was dark, dead. No, that wasn't right. He had charged it before dinner. He held down the power button. Nothing. Then he realized it wasn't his phone. It was a company phone. Just like the car, the driver. Life. He looked up at the thin strip of dark sky. "No," she whispered. She had her personal credit card, the one she'd had since college. She'd go to the main street and hail a taxi. He walked to the end of the alley, his handmade Italian leather shoes splashing through a dirty puddle. He stepped out onto the street, soaked and shivering. He held out his hand for a taxi. Some sped past, their out-of-service lights flashing. Finally, one stopped. It climbed, dripping. The tower. Sterling Tower, Castilian and mountainous, barked. The taxi driver, a man with a strong accent, looked at it in the rearview mirror. That's a beautiful building. Do you have any cash? My machine is broken. Julian's blood ran cold. Cash? He fumbled in his pockets. He had his money clip, a thin platinum clip. Empty. He'd used his last €100 on what? He couldn't remember. He lived in a cashless world, a world where he signed things, a world where his name was the currency. I have a card, said Julian, pulling out his personal gold American Express. I told you the machine's broken, said the taxi driver, pulling over to the sidewalk. Get out. But. Julian Thorne was kicked out of a taxi, 2 blocks from El Cenaculo. He was left on the street, the rain sticking to his hair. He was a man without a phone, without cash, without a home. Chapter 4, The Iron Lady's Verdict, continued meanwhile back in the Rothschild room, Isabella had returned. The Goldman bankers and the former CEO were standing, coats on, ready to flee. Gentlemen, Isabella said, her voice warm, as if nothing had happened. Please don't leave. The night is young. Antonio brings us a bottle of Fit, from 59, a celebration. Ava Sinclair was still at the table. Her face was pale. The triumphant grin had long since vanished, replaced by a nascent, repulsive horror. She had heard the click of the door when Price had taken Julian away. She had heard how final it was. Mrs. Sterling, I think I should, Ava stammered, trying to get up. Please, sit down, Miss Sinclair, Isabella said, taking her own seat. She gestured to the empty chair next to her. We have a lot to discuss, Bayou. Ava sat down. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely pick up her napkin. You? Isabella said, her voice dropping to a conversational whisper as the waiters poured the exquisite rich red wine, are a thief, and worse than that, you're careless. I don't know what it's about. The Phantom Society Viridian Assets, LLC. Really? You used the name of the company you were defrauding in the title of your criminal scheme? That wasn't just arrogant, Miss Sinclair. That was laziness. Isabella sipped some of the wine. Wonderful. She looked at Eva. You and Julian stole 80 million euros from my company. He, I imagine, did it out of some pathetic need to feel like his own man, to build something I couldn't touch. But you did it for an apartment. And what else? Isabella's phone vibrated. She looked at it. A text message from his legal team. Huh? He said, a small, cold smile touching his lips. We're here. Bank transfers. A 2-carat pink diamond pendant from Graf. A down payment on a Maserati. And oh my God, 50,000 euros transferred to a Dr. Simon Roth at a private clinic in Switzerland. Eva's face went from pale to a spectral, mottled white. You're not just a thief, Isabella said, her voice filled with a sudden, profound disgust. You're a cliché. You're the street trash you were quick to name. You could have aspired to something better. You can't, Eva whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Julian loves me. He said you were his future, Isabella finished. He told me the same thing 15 years ago. The difference is I had a 40 billion euro company to offer. You only had a brilliant leverage point. What are you going to do? Eva's voice was like a child's whimper. Julian. He's a family matter. I'll take care of him. He is guilty of betraying my trust. He is guilty of being a fool. Isabella bowed. You, however, are guilty of wire fraud. He's guilty of conspiracy. He's guilty of theft. And I'm a CEO, and I have a fiduciary duty to my shareholders to prosecute the thieves. She signaled to Price, who was now at the door. She's fired, of course, Isabella said. Her apartment, her car, everything will be seized as assets. But I'm a reasonable woman. She slid a card across the table. It was the Madrid prosecutor's card for economic crimes. Oh, he said, pushing in a second card. This is a Mr. Abrahamov's card. He's a recruiter. He has a job opening for someone with your unique skills in our Dubai office. It's a one-way transfer, no extradition. Eva looked at the two cards. Prison or exile. You have until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning to decide, Isabella said, standing up. Now get out of my sight, and please use the service exit. I think my ex-husband left it open for you. Eva Sinclair grabbed the second card and fled, not even bothering to pick up her bag. Isabella was left alone in the Rothschild room. Surrounded by the remnants of the party, she picked up her glass of Lafite 59, walked to the window, and gazed out at the city. His city. The rain was washing the streets. Chapter 5. The morning of the corporate execution. The next 24 hours were a masterclass in corporate warfare. Isabella Sterling didn't just fire Julian, she erased him. The first official move occurred at 7 in the morning. An emergency board meeting was convened at the Sterling Global Tower. Isabella, looking fresh and powerful in an impeccable white suit, laid it all out. She didn't mention the dinner, the insult, or the mistress. It was all business. Gentlemen, she addressed the board, my internal audit, which has been ongoing for 3 months, has confirmed our worst fears. Thorn Capital Division has been the victim of significant high-level wire fraud and financial misappropriation. The company presented the data. The $80 million overpayment by Viridian, the shell company, Viridian Assets LLC, the bank transfers, the falsified invoices. It was a clean, undeniable, and absolutely damning case. Julian Thorne, acting in concert with a junior analyst, Eva Sinclair, has actively embezzled from this company, he declared, his voice ringing with controlled, righteous anger. I, effective last night, have terminated his employment for cause under Section 7A, and have frozen all of his assets and holdings related to Sterling Global. Miss Sinclair has been treated. Mr. Torres, the man who just yesterday had been Julian's greatest cheerleader, was pale. Goodness, Isabella, I had no idea. He dazzled them, Isabella said, her voice softening slightly. He dazzled us all. That was his gift. But the numbers, Mr. Torres, don't lie. The board vote was unanimous. They retroactively approved the termination, authorized a public, independent audit, and voted to immediately dissolve the Thorn Capital Division. Its viable assets would be absorbed by the main Sterling Fund. His name was literally being erased from the building. The second move was the press. At 9:01 a.m., a single, devastating press release arrived at the Wall Street Journal and Financial Times. Global Sterling ousts Thorne, discovers major financial irregularities. It was brutal. He didn't insinuate. He didn't allude. He blamed directly. Sources close to the board, including CEO Isabella Sterling herself, confirmed that she personally discovered the fraud and acted decisively to protect shareholder interests. The board has given Ms. Sterling its full and unequivocal support. In one fell swoop, she had defined the narrative. This wasn't a messy divorce. It was a CEO cleaning house. She wasn't the victim. She was the hero. Julian, meanwhile, woke up at 9:05 a.m. to find his face plastered all over the financial news networks. Julian Thorne, the paper titan. Billionaire status. Fraud. Dismissed for just cause. His lawyer confirmed the total loss of everything. The prenuptial agreement was annulled. He tried to enter Sterling Tower, walking through the lobby he helped design. He swiped his card. Access denied. A guard he didn't recognize stopped him and read him a note. Mr. Thorne is no longer an employee. You are asked to leave the premises. His panic turned to public humiliation as he fled. The sound of his pathetic footsteps echoed in the vast marble hall that was no longer his. He was truly and completely out. Chapter 6: Icarus and the Price of Garbage. The consequences were swift and ruthless. The Wall Street Journal dubbed it the Ikigato. The Icarus of our time, Julian Thorne, ceased to exist. He tried calling his friends. They refused to answer. He was out of cash, out of a phone, and homeless. She used her last euros for a bus ticket back to the place she'd spent her entire life trying to escape. The humble village of Cáceres, Extremadura. Ava Sinclair took the second card. She left Madrid on a morning flight, accepting exile and the new identity paid for by Isabella. She became a ghost. Her career, his name, his future, all erased. The insult of being called street trash became the epitaph of her career. Isabella, meanwhile, experienced a renaissance. The narrative of the quiet, supportive wife was shattered. In its place stood iron sterling. She sold Julian's assets, including the tasteless attic, and moved into the magnificent and dignified family home of Limestone in the Geronimos district, Chapter 7, The Crack of Mercy, 3 months after the dinner. Isabella was in her new office when her assistant announced, "Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Robert Thorne is here to see you." A Robert Thorne from Cáceres. He says he is Julian's father. A man of about 60 entered, with a kind and tired face and the worried eyes of a retired school principal. He was the antithesis of Julian. "Mrs. Sterling, thank you for seeing me. I'm not here for the money. I'm here to apologize for what my son did to you, to your family's name. I raised him better. That thief, that's not the boy I raised." The man, a decent man, wept. Isabella felt a pang, not of pity for Julian, but of deep respect for this father. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice gentle, "you have nothing to apologize for." Her son made his decisions. He wants to apologize," Robert whispered. "No," Isabella said. "No, not for my sake, but for his. He cannot be forgiven by me. He has to learn to live with what he has done. He needs to find his own forgiveness. Mine is irrelevant." She handed Robert a card. "This is my personal physician. A Dr. Alistair Reed is the best. Your son is not a criminal, Mr. Thorne. And he is, as you said, a sick, lost boy. He needs help." Isabella stood up. "And Mr. Thorne, the audit has been completed. The 80 million was recovered from anonymous sources." She had, quietly, replenished the money from her own personal account to avoid Julian's prison sentence. The fraud charges have been reassessed. It appears to have been a serious case of mismanagement of funds, but not criminal. The case is closed. Robert Thorne's legs went weak. You! Why? Isabella said, turning back to the window. "You're a good man. And you've already suffered enough. My contract was with him, not with you," Robert whispered. God bless her." Isabella dismissed him. In the end, she had shown mercy, not because of Julian, but because of a good father, and because of herself. She was free. The meaningful ending. 6 months later, Julian Thorne was a forgotten footnote, working as a quiet assistant librarian in Cáceres. Isabella Sterling, however, had become a legend. She dissolved the toxic Thorne Capital Division and launched the Sterling Legacy Fund. This new $50 billion fund, focused on fundamental and sustainable investments, was a massive success. Isabella redefined true power, not as cold sacrifice, but as the courage to protect her foundation and humanity. What Julian and Abba saw as a dusty relic was actually a stronghold, and they were the ones who were expendable, audience interaction, and a call to action. This is the kind of drama that happens every day in the hidden boardrooms of the powerful. Like if you think Julian and Abba deserved their fate, and if you think Isabella made the right decision in the end. Share this video with someone who loves a story where the real boss finally rises up and takes control. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel. We uncover the most incredible real-life dramas every week. Comment below. Who was the real villain, Julian or Abba? Was it Isabella's mercy? Is his behavior toward his father a weakness or a sign of his true strength? Let's talk.